Good morning. Ayin Beis, Volume 3. We are on page 1310, discussing the process of countering the darkness of this world and the darkness, the status quo of the darkness, meaning the concealment of the divine within ourselves and within the larger world. And how do we do that? Is by revealing and allowing our divine soul and its fire, Ner Hashem Nishmasana, and its light to emerge and illuminate that darkness. And that is through a cognizant, contemplative approach where you use your mind, which in turn stimulates your feelings to another state of consciousness, which is not the status quo of the natural darkness of this existence, the existential darkness. And the Rebbe Rashab went into detail of what this contemplation consists of and coming to appreciate the real reality of existence, which is not its surface level, but the driving forces behind it, which in one word is called godliness. And we learn both about the Ur and the Chayis, just as it is in the person's soul. We become aware of the soul. And that automatically then, inevitably creates a situation where the soul is more important than the body. So the same thing on the macrocosmic level, the universe, when we think of the universe, the godliness within existence that gives it its soul, that when a person appreciates that, that too becomes the dominant force, like he called it his Gabrus Hatsura ala Chemer, where spirit becomes more dominant and more powerful than the matter which it's energizing. And indeed, when a person contemplates, like he said, in his own personal life, the neshama, so from my flesh I behold God, that helps us also appreciate godliness in that same way. And the same thing with our faculties. Our 10 faculties help us understand that we know within ourselves, help us perceive and understand the 10 spheres above and the 4 worlds of Atzilus Bria Yetzirah. And all that sublimates and tames the animal soul. It's essentially what we learned yesterday. And the details, the Rebbe Rashab also spelled out, but when I tried to explain that Ur v'Chayis is, besides being makif and pnimi, in pnimi itself, it sounds like it's the difference between the slapshus of koiches, like the moichin, that are concealed, are like the Ur of the midas, and the Chayis of the midas is more the chetzenius hamoichin, that actually sustains and is more revealed within the emotions. That's what it sounds like. But the main point is that from that we come to understand Ur v'Chayis in general, as it is with Seichel HaMidas, we have to come to understand it also with the divine energy within existence, both those levels. Now, the last thing we learned was that this becomes even increasingly also when it's also explained to the animal soul on the animal terms. He starts saying, when all this is understood also by the natural mind of the animal soul on its terms, it only makes it even more powerful that the light of the godliness is revealed in the darkness, which she's going to conclude afterwards, but we're middle of reading that. So the last thing we learned was the parentheses, that means that the contemplation is not just that you're bringing down the seichel of the nefesh alikis, the divine mind's understanding of things. Like he says, that you're bringing it down, the nefesh alikis, but also that the seichel tevi should understand it. You're not just bringing it down in slapshus yesha, meaning explaining it more in terms and ways that can be tangible and palpable, but as I explained the difference yesterday between the two, at least one explanation between the difference between the two. And by doing so, by MS, he says, you're actually elevating. It's not just bringing it It's not just a statement that the animal soul appreciates godliness on its terms. What you're really doing is elevating the animal soul. It says, Halah, that it too should understand a more sublime topic where on its own, it's an animal. It's interested in its own self-interest and its own survival. But you're elevating it that it should appreciate. That's where we stopped at the end of the parentheses. 8 lines from the top of the page on 1310. I'm going to continue from there. The pages can be found at ayinbeis.com. And this, as I said, is consistent with what he said on the top of 1309. So there's the contemplation on the divine soul's end, which is critical because that brings the light, and then the contemplation and the understanding even on the animal soul's end. Ubefrat, continuing inside, and ubefrat, and specifically, bizbonus anal, that this explanation for the animal soul, that the bizbonus anal, that the explanation of the animal soul is in the above mentioned contemplation, being isavus b'gedulas Hashem b'isavus elemus. Let me read it again. Be'inyan isavus. Remember earlier on the bottom of page 1308, he spoke about 3 things that one contemplates on. One is that the very fact that God creates, nothing can create itself. The animal soul could understand that. Secondly, is in the gedulas isavus. There he called it the haflah, meaning, and also the third thing, the magnitude and multitude. So the 3 points here, he's including them in 2. One is the very hisav is the creation. There's a contemplation of that. Then there's the way that God creates. And the gedula in that is both the contradiction. I don't know, actually, when thinking about gedulas Hashem b'isavus could also maybe be just referring to point number 3. He did mention 3 things at the bottom of 1308. To review them again. The creation itself, that nothing creates itself, and it has to be perpetual. God is constantly creating existence because it can't create itself. Number 2, that the creation is in a wondrous fashion. On one hand, the godliness manifests within it. On the other hand, it's removed from the creation. It doesn't feel like Mavdallah. And 3, the very magnitude and multitude of creation, multitude and magnitude of creation. Now, the fact that he says Gedulas Hashem, first I thought he meant 2 and 3, but you could also say it means 1 and 3, and maybe number 2, that element, that godliness is within existence, but also removed, can that be understood by the animal soul? You could argue that maybe that's more of a divine concept. But regardless, you could interpret it both ways. There's not enough data here to say which way, but he's definitely referring to 1 and 3. I would even say 1, 2, and 3. So both the Isavus, the Gedulas Hashem Isavus, that's why he calls his Bonus Hanal, he's referring to 1308. And, okay, so this is a Befrat. Why is it a Befrat? Because till now he's been talking about just the idea that everything we learned about the Erva Chayis and so on can be explained Gamba TV. And now he's breaking it down into more specifics, what can be explained to the animal soul. But it's all part of the animal soul because the conclusion of this statement has not yet come to, he's then going to say, and all this will make even more transformation or taming of the animal soul. And now he adds another thing. So that was the next thing. Down on the bottom of page 1308, after the 3 points of the contemplation, then he went on to say, Befrat, in the divine vitality, with the elemus, that they are internal within existence, the v'chayis that we discussed on the bottom of 1309 and 1308 and 1309. So now he's bringing that in as well. In other words, all of that can be explained to the animal soul. The 3 parts of the initial contemplation, and then now there's bonus chayis aliki. And how does that affect the animal soul? V'hu inyan. He's now explaining. Before he used the words that it's in a form of kiruv and dveikus, that this divine energy is within us. So when we recognize that, it creates a closeness and a will to a longing to connect with it and to attach with it. So now he's translating it now in the animal soul's terms. This is the union of loving God Kihu chayecha, because he is your sustenance, he's your life force. So even the animal soul could understand it for its own selfish purposes. It wouldn't exist were it not for this energy. How God is the general life force of the world in general, and is the life force, the life source, specifically of this person's nefesh. So all this is part of the contemplation of how the Elikus is chayis within us. In addition to Yisavus is the creation process. God is the creator. The creation needs a creator. It's perpetual. It's wondrous. The magnitude and multitude of creation. Now we're talking about the vitality that God is sustaining, and this is our vitality, so it's personal. In addition to being the vitality of the entire world, nafshe befrat, and he adds in the parentheses, v'hainu. And this means, sha'odamu tachlis hakavona. He's explaining why is chaya nafshe even more specific than the general world, because the person is the tachlis hakavona. God energizes all of existence. But what's the purpose of all of existence? Is the human being. So Adamu tachlis hakavona is the ultimate purpose. And within him, therefore, within him is a more internal v'chayis, even more than in the general world. The world is also sustained by God. But it's like the difference between someone building a home for their family and the family themselves. Where's there more pneumistic energy? The home is necessary because that's where the family needs to live, where your children and family need to live. But the v'chayis is much more pnimi in the family itself, because that's your intention. That's the tachlis hakavona. You're not building the world as an end in itself. Bereishis is b'shvil Yisrael, b'shvil HaTorah. It doesn't mention that. But bottom line, the whole world was created b'shvili nivra ela, for the human being, because they're the center cornerstone. That's why the Mishnah says in Sanhedrin that that's why God created the human being last. After setting the table, then you bring your special guest, because the human being is the center, the crown jewel of creation. So therefore, the chayis and primi is more within the person than it is within the world. That's also part of the contemplation. But that's not to say that there's no chayis, like we spoke, and chayis in the world itself, because also, but also in the worlds and in all creation, in all creations, there's the chayis prati, not just the chayis kloli in general, but also chayis prati. But in that itself, he distinguished now between the human being and the rest of creation. That's what this parenthesis is essentially emphasizing. So it's another aspect in all of this, but it's a parenthesis. Now, once we've established all this, and just summing up, going back to line 3, he started, everything we learned before is now understood and being explained also to the seichel, natural seichel of the animal soul. And he's spoken specifically, not just the divine soul is explaining it, but also on the terms of the animal soul. And specifically the Isponus, like he said, in Isavus and Gdulas Hashem and Chayes Eliki, all the aspects. All the way to the last point that he just made about the human being in the world, that all of it is being sustained by the divine energy. Hu chayecha. In other words, existence. It's like you're connecting to the thing that gives you life. And everybody wants life. Even an animal cherishes its own life, including an animal soul. So now he says, you see the same language he used on line 3, because he's concluding the point. And when all of this is also imbued within also the natural seichel, that the natural seichel of the animal soul understands this. That affects and effectuates and causes a sublimation and a taming of the animal soul, that it should desire godliness, even the animal soul. That's the conclusion of what he began on line 3. So in addition to everything we learn about the divine soul, now you're bringing it also into the animal souls, perception and experience, and you're causing it also to desire Elikut because that's its life force, that's its sustenance, as you just explained. Okay, now the Rebbe Rashab is tying it together. Okay, that's on a personal level. Then he continues, Vayidesha Meira Adam. And through the fact that now the human being has been enlightened and illuminated. Remember, before all this contemplation, the world and the person is in a dark state. If you leave a person at the status quo, like he said earlier, you're not going to have all this awareness. The tzimtzum and the concealment of the divine will dominate. This is now introduced Meir Ha'adam, like he used before the language. Now in his nefesh is radiating another state of consciousness, which is an illuminating state, an enlightened state, a higher state of consciousness, essentially. So he's now concluding, once it's radiating within the person, Meir Chelke Be'elam, it also radiates and illuminates the part, his corner of the world. Chelke Be'elam is an expression we say that the neshama comes down into the body and into the animal soul, and the job is to refine the animal soul, and also Chelke Be'elam, you're part of the world. That includes your food, your drink, your work, your family, all your interactions, your travel. So Chelke Be'elam is a general term for the part of the world that you are allocated to refine. So now the light that's radiating within you is not just staying within your own consciousness, it also affects the way you interact with the world around you. And he also draws down Gilei Elikus in the world. I would say what he means by Elam here means even more than Chelke Be'elam, because what's he adding? He just said Meir Chelke Be'elam. That it also extends, it's like the light also then has it spills over and affects the world in general. So first you radiate within, you contemplate, and you yourself become permeated with this awareness, with this light. So the darkness within your consciousness has now been illuminated. It spreads over to your Chelik Be'elam, and then to the general world, Gilei Elikus, in the world in general. And he explains what that means. Shayidei. He's summing up. Shayidei. Haveda vayisaskus. Through the Aveda, he again calls it a work, it's effort. Visaskus, it's with exertion, it's with involvement. It's not quick and superficial type of effort. He mentioned that clearly earlier, that this needs to immerse yourself. It's not a quick job. The Bizbannus Alaki, in what? In the divine contemplation, contemplating on the divine. Ubesedus Ava V'yira. And in turn, that awakens and stimulates and arouses a love and a reverence. Like he said all the way at the beginning of the subject, the beginning on page 1308, when he started that Megala Er Nafshi Elikiz Ba'aveda B'tfila B'Sedes Ava V'yira. Habai De Asaga V'Avona. So the Rebbe Rashab is tying it all together. He's concluding what he began in the beginning of the paragraph on 1308. And mitzvahs, and in the effort of build Torah and mitzvahs, now you could say where Torah and mitzvahs come from. Till now, we were only talking about contemplation that leads to a love and a reverence. But it has to lead to Torah and mitzvahs, and he proves it in the parentheses. Because the Torah and mitzvahs, actually learning Torah and performing mitzvahs, is the purpose. The ultimate purpose is not just that you should love and revere God. Like he says in Tanya, chapter 3, or is it chapter 4? 3 or 4. That love is the source for the 248 positive mitzvahs. The yira and reverence and awe is the mokar shasal leisaseh, is the source for the 365 negative mitzvahs. So you clearly see Ava V'yira is critical here, but its purpose is to actually bring into the performance, doing what, if you love God, you do what he wants you to do, and you avoid what he doesn't want you to do. So he says, now all this, through this Aveda, this is Bonanus, the Ava V'yira and the Torah mitzvahs, Mamshich, you could basically say it's Chabad Chagas Nihi. because Chabad is the moichin, the contemplation. Chagas is the midas, the emotions, and he is bringing it down into Torah and mitzvahs, into action. Mamshech Hayidei, through this, he draws down Gilei Lakuz Be'elam, the divine revelation to the world, Lahoyer Cheshech Ha'elam, to illuminate the darkness of existence of the world. V'zeu tachlis b'riyas ha'adam lamata. And this is the ultimate purpose. This is the purpose of the creation of the human being down below in this world, Lahoyer Cheshech, to illuminate the darkness. As he began at the beginning of the topic, all the way in back to page 1308, when he started Lahavin Kol Zeh Yesh Lahagdim. So now he's concluded what he started on 1308, the Tachlis B'Yisrael Lamati Laheres Acheshach, the Elam HaTachton. He now explained it in the last 4 pages. And with that, he concludes what he began there. So now we have a comprehensive perspective on the idea of what does it mean, illuminating darkness. We've been talking till now about illuminating darkness, transforming darkness, not just Havai Yechatem Merivav, but also Vayodim Keren Malkei, and so on. The transformation, which he's going to discuss now, and the next paragraph. But now he gave an overview and understanding what does it mean in Aved, the idea of transforming, illuminating darkness. So that concludes, as I said, from the top of page 1308. I'm sorry, 1307. 1307 began the subject of Lahavin Kol Zeh, and it went till now, till the end of this paragraph, 1310. So that's one long section here. So there. Okay. That will continue to the next paragraph. So now he's going to go back to the whole subject that we discussed earlier. Remember, Einoid, not just to rate, how do you illuminate this darkness? Do you just illuminate it? Do you eliminate it? Or do you also transform it? And that's what he's going back to the theme that was going on for this whole section from the beginning of volume 3, that it's also the transformation that the darkness itself will shine. If you go back to the top of page 1306, before he asked the question about what Mashiach will do that will cause tzaddikim to do tshuva, if you go back to the paragraph on page 1306, that was the last piece, that the Laila Kayoim Yoyer, that the night itself will shine. And not just with the light of the sun will shine into the night, but the night itself will shine. So now he's going to go back to understanding that now in the context, now we have the Avodas Hashem of it, it'll make it easier to understand in terms of how our contemplation and our emotion, feelings, and our consciousness is the process of illuminating this world, but now there's stages in that illumination. I should also add that when you read this, it's very consistent and sounds very, it really ties together the long discussion, going back, if you remember, Mutfa Murgish Muskel, the maturity process of a person growing from child to adult, and also in Avodas Hashem, that they grow first from more of a reflexive behavioral approach to godliness, to more one that is more selfish, meaning driven by the person's subjective interest, to finally coming to appreciate God on God's terms, the highest levels of Mutva Murgish Muskel, all the way to the Yichud Abba Ve'ima Ma'atik Anarich, gazing at the highest levels, and so on. So many ways, when he speaks here about the fact that we, through contemplation, and that in turn awakens our love and reverence and our Esig B'Torah mitzvahs, that itself, he elaborated earlier, there's the transformation of a human being from being a born child, which is a child who's completely behavioral and reflexive, to a person who deliberately comes to higher levels of maturity and higher states of consciousness. So this is very much tied into everything we've been learning about the transformation of a human being into a divine creature that introduces and illuminates themselves and the world around them with godliness. Just wanted to put that into the picture. So when you think of it that way, you see how the Rebbe Rashab is tying it all together. Everything we've learned literally from the beginning of volume 3, which goes back, we're talking about 100 pages now. Started 1207, now we're 1310. It's 103 pages. Has all been coming together, even though when we learned that it was a bunch of disjointed, seemingly disconnected pieces, but when you think of it, it's really all coming together as one part of one picture. And fascinating to see how the Rebbe Rashab built the structure and the whole puzzle emerging. But now we'll continue to the next paragraph. So now he says, Omnam. However, in this context that we just discussed, illuminating the darkness, the primary role, or the primary inyan, the primary objective of radiating the darkness, it's not just that the air dispels the darkness, because you could have air, there's a dark room, you bring in light, and automatically the darkness dissipates. It's not just that. Not just that it doiche. Doiche means it pushes it away. It dispels it. That the darkness should be transformed and become light itself. Very different level. So now he's putting that in context of what we just learned. Because if we stop right here, you could say, okay, initially a human being is shrouded in darkness. We're not aware of godliness, even though it's embedded within existence and within ourselves. The contemplation of the divine soul, which also explained it to the animal soul. And also the animal soul's understanding has now brought light, the godly light. But what about the very cheshach itself? You could say it was just dispelled. Till now it was dark, now it's light. He says, no, we need more than that. The goal is, the tachlis, he says, ikir, inyan, the ikir inyan, that's the words he uses, is it should be transformed, as we learned earlier, as I pointed out in 1306. And the truth is, this goes back all the way to page, just pointing out a few pages where he mentions it explicitly. 1298, he says it explicitly. And of course, right in the beginning, if you go back to page 1207, right at the bottom of 1207, 1208, and 1209, he said explicitly this idea of transforming, not just illuminating and dispelling. So now he's going to explain this. So even though we did hear this idea already before, but the Rebbe Rashab is now going to go to another level of explanation of this idea. And I'm specifically stating that because this is now going to be the beginning of, I'm literally going to be counting the pages here. This is going to go through a whole process. At least 25, 30 pages maybe, with a longer discussion, I would say even more, of what this means, the transformation of darkness. So as much as we learned about it, is now going to be far more explained. And then the Rebbe Rashab is going to come back to the tzaddikim doing tshuva on page 1342. We're 1310 now. So 32 pages of explanation. And then he's going to come back to the whole concept, the questions he asked about tshuva on page 1306. Just giving you the lay of the land here. Now, there's going to be a lot of aspects to this discussion of transformation of the darkness. It's going to ultimately lead to understanding the sweetening of the gvuras. Remember the sweetening of the severities. So this was a point he made earlier, which he said he would explain, but that is going to be, if you go back to top of page 1307, the sweetening of the gvura through chesed. That chesed, kindness, sweetens the gvura, or the sweetening of the gvura in its source, b'sharsham. Hamtokes ha'gvuras b'mkedam. b'sharshan, in their root, that the Gvura itself gets transformed. So all this is going to come together in the next sections that we're going to learn. So just giving a little introduction to what we're going to learn next. So before we read, again, I'll stop if there's any questions about anything specific I stated or the general structure of what we're going to be learning now.
So basically everything that we spoke until now.
You have an echo, Rab Shleimer, can't hear you. You have two. Okay.
I'm sorry. Basically, everything that we spoke lately is just a preparation to the real goal of the transformation, correct?
I wouldn't say that, because the Avodah of dispelling darkness is also an Avodah. It's like, even though Mashiach comes, there'll be total transformation, but there is iskafia, ishapche. You can't say it's a combination. Remember, at the end of the day, you can't get to transforming if you don't first dispel. You first have to bring light into your life. Then you can go. Remember, Ayin Beis is 1,310 pages already. For close to 1,200 pages, the Rebbe Rashab didn't even talk about transforming. He's been talking, I can't say that entirely. He did talk about transforming, but a lot of it was more about Havayu Elakim b'Shamayim Mal v'Oretz B'Tachas. It's only volume 3 where he began Ein Oid. So yes, the ultimate purpose is full transformation, that's for sure. But to say that it's only a preparation, I wouldn't say that either. Just like you don't say that iskafi is only for isapche. Iskafi is, and also, as I said, you can't look. It's like saying ben chamesh mikra, is that a stepping stone to becoming a ben chamesh esel gemara? It is. It's leading there, but it's also an end in itself, because every part naveda is a tachlus la'atzme. I'm just qualifying the way you phrased it. So both is correct.
Okay,
that's all. Yeah. Like you can't get to Shema and Shema Nesra if you don't first do the Birchas Krishma and Psukkah de Zimra and Birchas Hashacha. And every day we have to begin. That's the journey. So it's all stepping stones. The ultimate goal is this, yes. So now we continue. Dehini Yedua. Anybody else want to comment or ask anything? Okay. Dehine Yedua, because now it's known, Sheyesh Beis Deyes Be'inyan HaCheshach. There are two opinions about darkness. Im HaCheshach hu rak heder ha'or. Two opinions. Is darkness only the absence of light? You could say darkness doesn't have any substance of its own. There's no light, automatically darkness emerges. And it's not, it doesn't have a personal, any muhuzbri, it's not an entity, creation of its own. There's an opinion like that. Then he's going to just explain the parentheses, this opinion, and then he's going to bring the second opinion afterwards. So what does he say in the Imkain, according to this opinion, there's no way you can have darkness without light. Because darkness, all it is absence of light. So first has to precede darkness. Then you can say that darkness is the absence of light. If God had created darkness, like in opinion number 2, then it's an entity that can come before light. But if all it is the absence of light, so then you have to say that first came light, then you can say there's a state when there's no light, there's the absence of light is darkness. Another way of saying it, another way of explaining it, but in a place where light never reached at all, so in other words, there's two ways to look at it. Either first came light, then when light is removed, or then you can say when there's the lack of light is darkness, or you can say that the state of darkness, wherever light has not reached, that's darkness. Shezeu gamkin hedra. So it's just two ways of looking at it. In other words, this second way that he just explained could be that light wasn't created. It's just a place where light has not reached. God could say, here is light. I have not placed light over here. So therefore darkness reigns, not because it's a mitzias, but because there's no light. Ach zeu dafke, but even the second way of explaining it, this is only explicitly k'sheyesh mitzias ha'er. You can only say that when there's an existence of er. Then you can say the lack of. In other words, it's basically a simple logical conclusion. Something that is just the absence of something else cannot exist unless that other thing exists, because you can't create absence. All you're going to do is create something, and you could say darkness is the absence of light. That's one opinion. A second opinion is shacheshech hu bria b'fnei atzma. That darkness is indeed a creation of its own, that God actually created a state called darkness. Just like he created light, created darkness. Shagam b'loy oyer. Even if there was no light, shayich mitzias hacheshech. There's the possibility of the existence of cheshech because it's its own entity. V'yochel liyas shekodem el ha'er. And in contrast to opinion number one, in this case, it's also possible that it precedes light, because it doesn't need light to be the absence of it. It's its own entity. Ashekenu be'emes. And that's indeed the case. Like he's going to say right after the parentheses. What came first? Cheshech al pnei tahem. Then came Yehi Or. He's going to bring that right now. So now you'll ask, if that says so in the pasuk, why is there a first opinion? We'll talk about that. That's discussed in some places. But meanwhile, let's just, for the record, there are two opinions. And the truth is, even though there are two opinions, the truth is that cheshech is indeed a creation of its own. Like it says, that there was darkness over all of existence. And this state, this is the state of existence that precedes the Maimer when God said, let there be light. The pasuk begins, Bereshis bara Elokim shemayim v'sa'aretz, v'aretz ha'is toyev v'vayu v'cheshech al pnei tahem. V'ruach Elokim erachefetz al pnei hamayim. Then he says, v'yemer Elokim yehi oyer. So we see clearly that there was the state of cheshech before there was oyer. Now the Rebbe Rashab, in his usual thoroughness, is going to qualify this based on the commentary of the Ramban. Nachmanides says the following. It says, Haramban, the Pirush al Torah. So the Ramban has a classic commentary on Torah. Kosav, Shacheshech hu Esha Yusedi. He says that when he says in the Torah Cheshech, doesn't mean a state of darkness. It means the element of fire, but the way it is in its archetype of fire. Esha Yusedi. Ulefizeh hu mokra er. According to the Ramban, Cheshech is actually not darkness, is the archetype of fire, of Eish. So based on that, it's actually the source of light, because fire is an illuminating force, not a darker force. Why then the Ramban calls it Cheshech? Because you say Esha Yusedi, he says it's Choshech be'etzem. Even though fire, actual fire is light, is bright, but its archetype, its root, is a fundamentally dark state. That's what he says. So it's not talking about darkness as we would define darkness. It's talking about a state that is not yet illuminated, but it's the source of light. The
source of light or the source of fire?
Source of light. Look at the Maimer, the first Maimer, Shcheda Nivanova. I'm assuming he means L'kutei Torah, because he says the first Maimer. I would have to look it up, but he clearly talks about it there. But V'kan is bar ba'efen acher. However, here, meaning in this Maimer, this Hemshech Ayin Beis, we're explaining it in a different way. So the Ramban he's bringing the Ramban just to be thorough, but we're not learning this. The Ayin Beis is not going according to the Ramban, because according to the Ramban, Cheshach is a different state. Here he's talking about an opinion. According to the Ramban, we don't know whether Cheshach is an existence of its own or not. As a matter of fact, according to the Ramban, you could say the first opinion, that Cheshach is only absence of light. And the Torah, the word for Cheshach in the Torah is a different concept. It's the concept of the archetype of fire, which is actually Makara Er. But here, he says, Yisbar Beifanacha, meaning it's a different explanation, which is not uncommon, just important to point out. A lot of people, they think there's contradictions. Chassidus, like all of Torah, sometimes we'll talk according to one opinion and sometimes a different explanation. So, not opinion. In this case, the Ramban has a different way of explaining this idea. Here, in this Maimer, he's not speaking Cheshach al Pnei Tem according to the Ramban. That's basically what he's saying, which is perfectly fine. There are many different ways to explain a verse in the Torah. Okay, so we've established that there are two opinions, and he's saying the emes is, according to the second opinion, it's a bria b'fnei atzmo, a creation of its own, and he brought proof from the pasuk, different than the Ramban interprets it, which is fine, and that's what we have right now.
Could you explain what does it mean that the source of light is choshuv be'etzem?
I said the word archetype. Everything has a source in the higher levels. The source in the higher level does not have to be the same personality of the thing that is below. It's like, just like you would say, for example, subatomic energy. Subatomic energy, you don't know whether it's light or dark, but it could be the source of something that has a particular personality. So the fact is, when you look in the Ramban, they talk about it. They talk about the Dalad Yisayis, Eish Roach Mayim Ofer. So there's fire, there's air, wind, water, and earth. So these Yisayis are the four elements that are like also archetype. But then there's Eisha Yisaydi. There's the root of them all, the source of them all. And the source of them all is like a state that is not yet, is chashach, meaning it's not yet in any way revealed, but that will become the source of what anything will come from it. That's what basically the Ramban says. I mean, if you want an example from our faculties, your seichel is oyer and gilui, but the koyach hamaskil or the chachmas tima is concealed, even though it's the source of seichel. So seichel goli comes from a place that's a super conscious state that's concealed. So the source of something doesn't have to be, is not necessarily the light that emerges.
Are you taking questions now?
I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, so I apologize. I'm a little confused here. Forgive me. Again, 6:30 a.m. here, but you're saying that the source of darkness is this fire, which is also the source of light. Is that correct?
Yeah, fire is the source of light. Yeah.
But you're saying he also says that the fire is also the source of yesodi. That.
So I just said to you, because the source of light is a fundamentally dark state.
I got it. So, but okay, I haven't asked my question yet. But he says, nevertheless, the choshech is a bria bifnei atzmo. It's a separate creation than or.
He just said he's not explaining it according to this way. He says Yisbar ba'efanacha. Here he's explaining it not according to the Ramban. That's the whole parenthesis. It's a different explanation.
Okay, I'll keep listening.
Here he's using choshech. In this Maimer, he's using choshech as actual darkness, which is a creation of God. It has nothing to do with Eisha Yesedi. The Ramban has a different interpretation in that verse.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Ukamoy kain or kach kosav. Yetzer Eir u'beir cheshach. It says, we say every night in davening, Yetzer Eir, he shaped light, u'beir cheshach. U'beir cheshach, and he created darkness. So from this we see, another proof that darkness is a creation of its own. Because if darkness was just the absence of light, how would you say beir cheshach? You should have said he created light, and when there's no light, the absence of light is darkness. But the fact that he says Yetzer Eir beir cheshach, clearly that cheshach is a bria b'fnei atzma. V'chein moving Maimer Azal, and so too this is understood from the Maimer Azal, from the sages, the statement of our sages, that in the beginning of creation, it says light and darkness functioned together. Barvuvia means they were like a mixture, a combobulated mixture of both, like a snowball of light and darkness. So from that Maimer Chazal, clearly, if darkness is just the absence of light, how could you call it a mixture of darkness and light? The fact that you call it such, from that we understand that cheshach is an existing entity of its own, and before God separated between darkness and light, they were combined and mixed together. V'amru, and Chazal also say, Kibriyase shalelom, b'reisha chashecha, v'hodim nehera. So the Gemara in Bracha says that, when it comes to Kachim, Halayla, Hayem Helech Achar Halayla, like Shabbos or Yom Tov, when do we begin Shabbos and Yom Tov? We don't begin by day, in the morning, it begins the night before. By other things, not Kachim, we say Halayla Helech Achar Hayem. The night comes after the day. So the Gemara says, why? Because like it is Kibriyosha Shlem, because that's the way God created the world. Bereisha Chashecha, first darkness, and then light. So that too seems to indicate that darkness is an entity of its own. The Chein Mashmois is bringing now another. So far I brought 3 proofs. The Pasuk Cheshach al Pnei HaSahim that comes before Eir, the Yetzer Eir beir cheshach, the Arvuvia, and now Kibriyos Shalelom. And now a 5th proof. V'chei mashmois masha'omar, masha'imrim, and it also appears the meaning in what it says, Geilal Eir mipnei cheshach, that he moved Geilal Eir. He what's the word? The Geilal means like he turned the leaf. He moved away light in the place of darkness. The Geilal v'cheshach mipnei Eir.
Rolls, like ruling.
Like glila.
Yeah.
Like wrapping. What word did you use?
I said like rolling.
Rolling. Yeah, like rolling away. Yeah. Like when you roll up, you say glila. Hagben glila. Glila, you wrap it up. But yeah, like rolling. He rolled away light. Okay, Geilale. The Geilale mepnei cheshach, in the place of darkness. The cheshach mepnei eir. And then he rolled away the darkness from in face of it. From that alone tells you, if cheshach was just absence of light, how could you make such a statement? So the cheshach hu davar b'fnei atzmei, lo rak heder ha'er. From this we see that darkness is an entity of its own, not just the absence and the lack of light. The geilal mepnei ha'cheshach. And then he rolled away light in the face of darkness, which tells you again that there's an entity here. If darkness was just the absence of light, you don't have to roll away light. You just have to light when light is not there. Darkness emerges. Here clearly, geilul means it's an action. So all this is coming to set the tone, the stage for what he wants to say, that it's not just enough to push away darkness. Since darkness is an entity of its own, so he says, and in this meaning in this second interpretation, second opinion, which is the emes, in that dependent, the kavana that we've been discussing here, what do we say at the beginning of the paragraph? That to radiate the darkness is not just the darkness dissipates; it's transforming the darkness. So that is interdependent, dependent on it follows this opinion, the truth that darkness is existence. Why? Because he says like this: because if darkness was only the absence of light, then the inyan of radiating darkness would mean to push aside, to dissipate, to dispel the darkness. Because where light radiates, automatically the darkness dissipates, is pushed aside, is dispelled. But if the darkness is an existence of its own, a creation of its own, then the intention, when we say to radiate the darkness, it's not just to dispel the darkness. Because just dispelling the darkness, you have not really radiated it. All you've done is pushed it aside because it's still an existing entity. But rather, there means, according to that approach, that it's existent. The ultimate purpose is not just that you push it aside, but that the darkness itself is transformed into light. When it's absence of light, you can't say that. Because when absence, there's nothing to transform. All you can do is bring light, so there won't be darkness automatically. But according to this approach, this opinion, which was the one we're following here, that it's a creation, that just because you pushed it aside doesn't mean you transformed it. You just sidelined it. Whereas here, the kavanah would be transforming it. Okay. So then you could ask the question, so why did he bring the first opinion? Not just so you could say to point out that it's according to the second opinion, but he's going to explain further. We're going to stop here, but the next section he's going to still explain that we still need both elements. There's both the element of it being the absence of light, and there's also the element of being a creation of its own. Both are correct. There's actually a footnote from the Rebbe in Sefer Mamorim Tavshin Ches where he brings these two opinions. And I don't remember if he brings the Ayin Beis or not, but he definitely brings that both opinions are correct. And the Rebbe Rashab is going to explain that now in the next section. But we're going to stop here before Mukol Mokim, 6 lines from the bottom of page 1310. Okay. So we've entered now into the zone of understanding the transformation of darkness. And to do that, the Rebbe Rashab introduced the two approaches. What exactly is darkness? To understand the very nature of darkness. Is it just the absence of something else, light, or is it an entity of its own? And that is dependent what we mean, as he just explains. Is it just dispelling darkness or also transforming darkness? So we'll stop here. Any questions?
It's hard to understand a little bit how could it darkness be a creation. But
I just gave an example. Chachmas Tima is completely concealed and is the source for Gilui HaSeichel, which is Gilui Eir.
But this is not really Choshech. For us, it's Choshech.
It doesn't matter. It's Choshech. It doesn't matter whether it's for us or not. That's called Chachmas Tima is Choshech Be'etzem. Why not?
So if Choshech is a separate creation,
anyway, why don't you guys? Are you all ready to look into the Ramban, who's the one that says it? Look inside the Ramban. He explains it. This is not the Rebbe Rashab's Chiddush here. He's just quoting the Ramban, who says it in Breishis.
I have a different question.
I'm just saying to Reb Shlomo, just look inside. He explains it.
I see. Reb Shlomo, were you finished, or should I wait?
I'm finished.
Okay. If the tachlis is to transform the darkness, so then what does it mean to bring light into the darkness? Does that mean to push it away? So in other words, you see, we've discussed this as a two-step process, essentially. Bring light into the darkness, and then ultimately transform the darkness. But what does it mean to bring light into the darkness? To push it away, to put it on the side, to make it this and that? It kind of changes the meaning of what it means to bring light into the darkness.
That's what he's in the middle of discussing. He's going to discuss this at length now. Correct.
Okay. So we're going to see a more nuanced understanding, not just of transforming the darkness, but what it means to bring light into the darkness. Is that what you're saying?
First of all, he said it at length till now. The transformation is just a recent revelation.
Correct.
Till now in Ayin Beis, he's all been talking about bringing into a place of tzimtzum, havayu elikim. Now he's introducing transformation. So we've already discussed at length the idea of bringing light into darkness. Now he's going to talk about even the transformation of it. And he's going to talk about, that's what the next section is all about. This whole section is going to now talk about these two different aspects. Yeah.
When the Rabbi is saying that
remember, in Avodah it's very simple. There are times where we have iskafia, where you just refrain from doing something. It doesn't mean you've transformed your animal soul. You just control it. It's a normal thing. And then there's a deeper level where you actually transform the enemy into becoming an ally. In Tanya chapter 9, he explains it in that way, where there's a battle. A battle, you can subdue your enemy, doesn't mean you turn your enemy into an ally. And then there's transforming it. So in Avodah, it's a very clear step.
Thank you. It's
going to be elaborating on this at length.
It's a very helpful mashal. Thank you for clarifying. Thank you very much.
Maybe we could say that the level that we learned yesterday about that the nefesh activis understands how good Elukus is. Maybe this is.
I said that yesterday. Yeah, I said that. I explicitly said that. Yeah. I think that's all part of the picture. Yeah. Yes, Rabbi Eliezer, go ahead.
When the Rabbi says Choshech is the conclusion is that the Choshech is a Brias Ba'atzmo, it's a Bria. Obviously, that's referring to only after Tzimtzum, right? Because before Tzimtzum, there's only Or Ein Sof. There's no darkness before Tzimtzum. It wasn't Choshech, this Brias of Choshech that the Rebbe is talking about, only after he created a Makom Panoi, or so to speak, of after Tzimtzum.
I beg to differ. Before Ur, there's the Helam Ha'atzmi. Remember that?
But didn't we say Helam Ha'atzmi was only in relationship to the Nivra?
No, Helam Ha'atzmi is fundamentally concealed because God is not defined by light. Light itself is also a force that God put into play. Ur Ein Sof is not Atzmus, and the levels, there's before Ur Ein Sof, there's a Helam Ha'atzmi, which is fundamental concealment. God is not defined. As a matter of fact, the whole piece that we've been learning is that through the Kalim, through Malchus and so on, we reach Helam Ha'atzmi, which is higher than Ur.
So Helam Ha'atzmi would be considered the root of the Choshech.
No, you made a statement about the before the Simpsons, so I'm responding. Right. He's not talking about that here.
But the Choshech that he's talking about here right now, Choshech as a Bria, and he quotes the Psukim of Tahom, there was Choshech and stuff. That's obviously dealing with after Tzimtzum, no?
What difference does it make? The Tzimtzum itself is a Helam. There's also Choshech. And the Tzimtzum precedes the Kav. I mean, what's your point? I'm not sure what you're trying to, what difference does it make?
Because I thought we would say before the Tzimtzum there was only light. There was no such Kav. But you're saying there is Helam Ha'atzmi.
Before light there was Helam. So
okay.
And if anything, you say first came Tzimtzum, then came light. Okay.
Not to get too metaphysical here, but does this imply? I'm sorry, but you can skip the question, but I have to ask since Eliezer went there. Does this imply that darkness is fundamental to the existence of God because he can't be contained, he can't be known, he can't be limited, and so therefore the Helam is a necessary part in a sense of there being a creation outside of God because otherwise it cannot be all God. So there must be a helam, there must be a concealment, because otherwise we wouldn't even be here to talk about it. Is that a fair philosophical logic?
But nothing to do with this mimer here.
I get that, but is it a correct analysis?
That what? I didn't understand that God is not bound by light. I'm not sure
That
what
the
you
fact
said.
the fact that God can't be bound implies that there has to be a concealment in order for there to be anything but God.
I'm not sure what that means. I'm not sure. I mean,
with all due respect to the rabbi, Isaac, you can't use the thing that has to be that way because God can do anything he wants. So therefore, just because this is the way, it doesn't has to be anything. This is the way he chose to, and that's the way it is. But he doesn't have to do anything. It doesn't have to be this way or that way. I think those terms of absolute cannot be used with God because he just like Rabbi Simon said, that in the past it's like an artist. It's just the one aspect of it. It didn't have to be this way. He could do whatever he wants. So nothing has to be. That's just my opinion.
No, fine. That's another discussion. The point, I'm not sure what you're asking me. Are you saying why God made it tzimtzum in order to conceal, in order for us to create us? Is that what you're asking me?
No,
that's correct. All of Chassidus talks that tzimtzum, just like a teacher, conceals the infinite brilliance to allow space for a recipient. That's what you're asking me?
Yeah, well, no, I'm asking that, but I'm taking Eliezer's question one step further because I would have thought that the darkness, that like he was saying, that it must come after the tzimtzum, or the tzimtzum actually creates its.
Well, I just told you, Helam Atzmi comes before Eir.
I know you did, and that's why I'm trying to understand the nature of darkness, pre-tzimtzum darkness. I'm trying to understand
I frankly think it just confuses. To me, it's complete distraction to what we're learning here because it's not relevant at all.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's as I said, it's a side question, and it's fine. We don't have to go into it anymore. If
you learned Ayin Beis, there's a whole pages. I already point that out, where he talks why that Eir does not reveal the etzem as much as Helam does. I mean, that's what you're asking. So just go back to the whole page where I forgot where it was. I remember I referred it to you guys earlier. A whole section where he talks about why Kalim are higher than Eir. So if that's what you want to discuss, I would just go back earlier to I don't remember where it was.
Well, but just to be clear, concealment is not the same thing as darkness. Because
I don't know.
Then
That's
you're
why
going
I'm
to
not.
opinion one.
So why are you connecting it here? So why then you connecting conceal? Why exactly? What's the point then?
Okay, very good point. You won the debate. Sure.
No, there's no debate. I just see that it's not relevant to our conversation here. That's all.
You're right. No, but this was a good Ian, it was helpful. Thank you.
We're talking about the choshech,